Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Academic, where I talk to students, academics, and industry experts about topics where the cyber domain intersects with the real world. My name is Ahmed Ibrahim, and I am a lecturer and researcher in cybersecurity at Edith Cowan University. In this episode, I will be talking to my guest about cyber radicalization, his experience from being in the industry, and the research he has commenced in his PhD. My guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Hussain Ibrahim. He is currently a PhD candidate in Edith Cowan University in Australia. Prior to coming to Australia, he was the head of Department of Research and Publications of the National Counter Terrorism Centre in the Maldives. During his 23 years of service in defense, he has held various senior roles, such as the Principal Director to the Department of International Defense Cooperation and Policy, Defense Advisor to Pakistan, Staff Officer to the Minister of Defense and National Security, and Deputy Commander of the Maldivian National Defense Force Central Area. Now, Hussain, you started your defense career in signals and have done various trainings related to it. But you didn't start your higher studies in signals, isn't it?
No, Ahmed, I didn't. I was an astrophysicist, and later on I changed my trade to IT. We are talking about the time frame during the birth of modern day IT. I finished my studies in the very early 90s. So when I came back, the trade that I went into was communication in defense.
Okay.
Because defense was also going towards IT at that time.
So back in the 90s, you were one of the first officers to hold a master's degree in the defense force, isn't it?
I was the first. Fortunately, I have the record of having the first person to hold a master's degree. And in fact, I was the first person to be directly brought in as a commissioned officer. Before me, there were no process of direct commissioning in the Maldivian Defense Force. You go through the ranks from a private all the way into the officer corps. But with me, they started bringing in fresh people into the officer corps.
So this would probably be recognition of higher education, isn't it?
Yes.
So having a master's back in the 90s, how significant was that compared to the standard of education back then in the Maldives?
Well, Ahmed, we are talking about a time when there were hardly 200 odd people with master's degree in the Maldives. So I guess there weren't that many people with a master's, and only probably a couple of people with a PhD at the time.
Yep.
And that was the time frame during which lots of Maldivians went abroad, started finishing their first degree and masters. In fact, it was in 1978, I think, that we started having A-levels in the Maldives. So the first A-level batch would have finished their first degree, and then some of them would have gone to their masters. So that time frame was at the birth of Maldivian higher education, really.
Yes, in fact, I remember when I was growing up, having a degree, a bachelor's degree, was like one of the dreams that every student had. In fact, every parent wanted their kids to have a degree. That was back then, but now things have changed quite a bit, I guess, in the higher education space in Maldives?
I had no teaching experience, but while I was serving in the defense sector, while I was serving in the army, I was requested by Ministry of Education to go and teach in uh, Science Education Centre. That's the
Mm-hmm.
A-level school that we had at that time,
Yep.
in Armenia school. Because there was a lack of physics teachers at that time. And the first few years, I used to go and teach physics in those schools as well, while I was serving in the military.
So back then, the Science Education Center, or SEC, is most popularly known as, that was the only place where you could actually do your A levels after the
True,
grade 10, isn't it?
true, true.
Coming to now, the present day, your current PhD topic is on the detection of online radicalization in the Maldivian language. There are so many interesting parts in this title alone, and I'd like to dissect this a bit further. So before we dive too deep into your research, I think we should start with online radicalization, or also referred to as cyber radicalization. Even though we hear the word radicalization a lot on the news, media, or various other platforms in various contexts, its meaning is not very obvious, isn't it? So, what does radicalization actually mean?
Well, the word radical has two meanings. One is the relative meaning, where the relative meaning is basically a movement away from common beliefs. Even scientists, when they propose new theories, they basically propose a radical view, radical thinking. So radical in itself is not a bad thing. But for us, for the defense domain, radicalization has an absolute meaning which goes with a readiness to use violence to promote own beliefs. So when that readiness to use violence comes in, then it's not a good thing, it's a very bad thing.
In a global context, how did this become such a huge global issue?
I think it's been around for centuries, radical views, radical thinking. But I guess the main difference in the 21st century is that during the old days, your radical thinking cannot be passed on to too many people, because either it's going to be written down on a book and passed onto a limited audience, or it goes through by word of mouth. But come this century, information reach has increased exponentially. And publication thresholds have gone down. In the old days, when someone publishes something, it's scrutinized by other academics, by other people of that particular discipline. But today, anyone can claim anything, even on a religious topic, and send it through the internet to a huge audience. So I guess what has changed is the way radical thinking has been propagated to a larger audience.
So, with all the uh, technological developments and how easily everybody is connected to each other through the internet, through social media, through various other platforms, it is much easier now to spread their propaganda, spread their information, regardless of the validity of that information And what you're saying is people just consume this, and they find it easy to believe. So this is something to do with how they are communicating this. And is that where the language comes in, and how significant is how you use your language to actually spread this sort of ideology or this sort of message?
Language is the basic form of communication, isn't it? I mean, rather than sending photos or sending videos, text by its very nature has a certain authenticity in it. When you write something down, people tend to believe it. And especially if you quote some scriptures, some sayings of people whom you have faith in, then it gets more concrete as well. So what the radicals do is they tend to take on certain parts of scriptures and then give their version of what those scriptures mean, what are the sayings of scholars, sayings of prophets mean, so that they would take it out of context and give a meaning that promotes violence. I guess if you consider the success of ISIS compared to other terrorist organizations, the main success of ISIS was their ability to communicate and their ability to recruit through that online communication.
So are you talking specifically about social media or other forms of channels?
Both social media and other forms of channels as well. Social media, because of its availability, large availability, gets used more often. But I guess social media is the first phase of that recruitment process. Once you hook a person in, then of course they use the dark web as well as other means to get the person deeper into their belief sets.
So do you think the good guys are winning, or is this uphill battle?
What do you think, Ahmed? If you see the success rate of ISIS, you would have seen a huge decline from 2014 onwards. And at 2014 they were controlling nearly 1/3 of Syria, but now, and is much ground in Iraq. But now look at them. So I would say the good guys are winning.
You have decided to commit 4 years of your life, traveled across the globe to do a PhD here in Australia. So why is this topic important to you?
We have had a bad experience in Maldives. We used to be a very moderate Muslim nation, but unfortunately, during the last couple of decades, the trend had been towards a more conservative form of Islam. Though conservative Islam is not something bad, conservative Islam is a good thing, but with the conservative Islam, there came a certain group of people who were pushing for violence as well. And we have had a huge percentage. I think we are the second highest country in terms of per capita foreign terrorist fighters in Syria.
Right.
Maldivian government has given a figure of 170, over 170 Maldivians who have gone to Syria, and that's a huge figure for a very small country.
Where does the population stand right now?
For 2020, they have given a figure of 550,000 Maldivians.
Right.
And in a country of 550,000 Maldivians, you know, over 170 is a huge amount.
That's a big number.
Huge amount of Maldivians, big number. And a lot of them include women and children as well, because some of them went with their wives and children, young kids as well. And today we are facing the prospect of, bringing those women and children back home from the refugee camps in Syria.
Even though Maldives is such a remote country, well, no place is remote when it comes to internet. So do you think this is symptomatic of the ability to recruit people online?
Yes, and unfortunately, the Maldivian language is unique. It's only the 550,000 Maldivians who speak and write the language. So any communication that goes in the Maldivian language goes below the radar of the international policing community and international intelligence community. So it's rather easy for the people in Syria, the Maldivians in Syria, as well as the radical elements inside Maldives to propagate their radical belief sets to the Maldivian audience.
Because of our unique characteristics of the language, the common tools or techniques that are being used to detect this sort of communication is going undetected. So what are the unique challenges when it comes to Divehi language? And I believe this is specifically the area in which you are doing your PhD in. So what do you think are unique challenges to the Divehi language?
One thing is it's a language which only came into use in computers and in social media quite recently. So language tools for the language has not yet been developed, or some very basic tools have been developed by people back home.
Mm-hmm.
However, the detection algorithms look at words, verbs, things that are in other foreign languages. And the Maldivian language is a very unique language which has linguistic parameters which are quite different from other languages. It's a fairly old language whose base is in Sanskrit.
Earlier you mentioned about lack of language tools. So would you be referring to the other sorts of components or tools that, for example, a language such as English, we use natural language processing to talk to Alexa, to talk to Google Assistant. And this is made possible because the computer can understand our commands that we speak in English. But when you say there's a lack of language tools, are you referring to that kind of tools for the Diwali language?
Not specifically that, but for example, if say if you want to create an algorithm for detecting radicalization in, say, for example, English language, you do have dictionary sets for radical words in English, whereas for Diwali, those sets are not there.
Okay. So the data is just not there.
It's not there. And the other difficulty that you would face is, unlike other languages, other world-renowned languages, the amount of people who use this language is only the 550,000 Maldivians.
Right.
So even if you do try get a data set, the data set is not going to be enough, or not going to be as huge as for English language or Arabic language or Urdu or any other, language which millions of people use.
So I'm sure by the end of your PhD, you probably would have solved this problem.
Well, I would take a step in that journey towards solving it. There would be others who would follow after my footsteps, who would polish the tool, who would get better results than me.
Yeah.
But as I said, I was a pioneer in Maldivian armed forces for being the first directly commissioned officer, first masters in Maldivian army. So the same way, I would love to be a pioneer in, this path towards getting a solution to online radicalization detection.
I'm sure your contributions would be highly valuable, not only for the Maldives, but also in this global fight against cyber radicalization. Now, it's been many years since you've completed masters, and so and during this time, you've been serving in the defense force, and after such a long time away from studies, coming back to university, how has this transition been for you? How do you feel like coming back to the university as a student?
Yeah, 1993 was, I think, a little bit further off, but I guess studying by its very nature is something that takes a lot of effort. So it's not like your normal defense life, where a lot of your work goes into honing your skills, planning things. But here you've got to read a lot.
Yep.
And fortunately for me, I got a very good advice from you with regards to joining the integrated PhD program. So the first year, I got to hone my skills a little bit. And now it's getting a lot easier than it used to be.
Right. Any final advice for future students who would want to get into this kind of field or pursue a PhD?
I would say cyber use of cyber domain in terrorism is something that needs to be researched in the future, because with regards to the use of cyber domain for other purposes, the loss of life as well as material when the cyber domain has been used to promote terrorism far outweighs anything else. So this is something that needs to be well researched, so that at least we are a step ahead of the terrorists or at par with them, so that we don't get into surprises as often as we were getting before. So we need bright minds to come in and research this field as much as possible.
Right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Hussain, for this interview and very useful information that you have given. And I wish you all the best in your PhD. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me in this episode. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at AI8RAHIM. That's AI number 8 RAHIM. And leave a comment or keep an eye out for the next episode.